Hi everybody, it's T. Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our exploration of the Enneagram. And if you'll remember last time around, we kind of just started talking rather randomly about the Enneagram and what some of these different types really mean and the arrangement of the diagram, all that good sort of stuff. So we had a nice little first exposure to it. And we talked a bit about how there have been so many different models or how do I say that, variations on the model that's been put forward. So sometimes the language is changing a bit. And at this moment, I don't know yet who, is there one group that's considered to be the authority? I know someone has Enneagram.com, but I don't know that is that just because they conveniently bought it or not. One moment, I need to close my door. Oh, thank you, dear. So we played around with it a little bit, thought it was pretty interesting, thought it had some brilliance, so that merits deeper discussion around it. And we started trying to see if we could get it to overlay on the change grid, and that has proven to be rather elusive. We can see where each of these different 9 types might land on the change grid, but to see them laid out in this order, so far, we've not been able to figure that out. So maybe it's possible. I certainly think it is, but we've certainly not hit on the secret sauce to see how we can make that happen. Now, one of the reasons why I said I believe it should overlay one way or another is because these 9 types are arranged in a circumplex, if you will, in kind of a continuous, well, it's on a continuum, but I don't even know what the extremes are anymore. I don't know where it starts. I don't know where it ends. And so it ends up being circular. So in the characteristics of this type 5 start to morph into the characteristics of 6 and then 7 and then 8. So all of these have got countless points in between. And even inside of that pure kind of type, there's still subtle variations, and it continues all the way around. And so anything that's got that level of I want to say, kind of practical progression, that kind of level, I think it has a way that it overlays. But we're still exploring that. So the other thing that I said was that, well, if it doesn't overlay, then how do we end up using it? And I said, sometimes we've said that if we look at a psychometric tool, we've said that they're all good. They're all interesting. None of us can pass one up, given the opportunity to complete one. But at the end of it, they all end up in the same place. And that same place is with the question, now what? And the moment that question is posed, we go like, well, that's the time we pull in a change grid. And so it may very well be that the change grid simply fits as the next step following whatever someone's exploration of their Enneagram happens to be. So I still believe it overlays. We don't know how that does that, but I can certainly see how the change grid can interact very well with the Enneagram. Thoughts about that before I throw out today's puzzle? Nope. Denise, you're one of our resident experts, so feel free to unmute and chime in on anything I'm saying. Any thoughts there, Denise?
No, you make great sense. I can't wait to see the puzzle finish.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I do think it fits in, but I may have to bring to everyone's attention a bit of a reminder that we tend to look at the the side of the change cube where we're looking at challenge versus ability. But if I put that change cube on its side, I could also be looking at changes that happen with the 2 axes being like ability and importance, or challenge and importance. So, it's a cube, so it's got multiple sides, which means I can look at different sets of these two dimensions. So it may very well be that it doesn't lay on the ability versus challenge face of the change cube. Maybe it exists on the ability versus importance, or the challenge versus importance. So if that's too much for anybody to just go like, okay, wait, I had what did you just say? Well, then, we'll get into it nice and slowly, but that's also a possibility.
Hey, T.
Yeah.
Quick question for Denise. Denise, which assessment organization are you using with your practice? Are you using the Integrative 9?
I use that all the time. They have the best reports and their information is so logical. And it comes with like a 24-page report. So it's a lifetime of information in that one report that you can always continue to go back to and continue to work on yourself through that information.
And so Denise, are you kind of like an affiliate for that? Do you make money if someone takes a test at your recommendation?
No, I'm
Well, that's a
certified.
shame because I was going to tell you, you should give us all your link. So you can get some
I am
credit.
certified to use their products, so you can, hire somebody who's a coach that does that. And for this group, I would be happy to have a conversation. If you guys want to take that assessment, I'm happy to set up a call and go over the report with you.
Excellent,
I
excellent.
took that. This is Kathy. I took two. I just out of curiosity, I took that one and came out a completely different type than what I had originally taken. And then I took the Rezo Hudson,
Yeah.
which is the original one that I took, and I got an interesting also shift, but I came out the same type, a competing type with my original type on the Rezo Hudson. Very different forms of taking the test. Both I paid for because I went for free ones, and the free ones all then at the end said, we will use, I agree to use your, to market to you. And I said, I don't want any more spam than I already have. So I decided it's worth the money to pay for, the Rezo Hudson is only $12, and you get a very long, in-depth report as well. So anyway, so yeah, it'd be fun to talk to you about it sometime, Denise, if you have time. That would be great. Yeah.
Good. Now, I did say as your homework, I suggest that people go out and find some of the free ones or spend money on one that you like. And I remember Denise gave us that pointer as well. So did anybody do that? Anyone figure out who they are, what they are?
Yeah,
Well,
took
I
a
actually
free-
did the Rizzo Hudson because I heard Kathy mention it. And so I did that one, and I've not done another one to do the comparison as some have just mentioned.
Yeah. And what did you end up being,
Yeah.
if you don't mind us asking?
Oh, not at all. I was 2 as a primary. Mhm.
2 is your primary. And did your results tell you what if any wing is yours? Were you a 2 wing 1 or a 2 wing 3? Do you remember?
You mean the difference between what is it, fable and stress? Relax.
No,
I'm sorry,
that's what the
relax and
arrows
stress.
are about. This is that very often everyone has their core type or their main type, but they may have a significant contribution coming into their personality from either type alongside of them. So
Mhm.
it could just be a pure 2. You could be a 2 1. You could be a 2 wing 3 as well.
Yeah,
So some of the tests tell you that, and others just tell you what your main type is.
Yeah, I think you have to take the long test to get the wings and the subvariants and all of that, which I opted to do, which is why I paid for it. You can't get that necessarily on a free test.
Yeah, I also couldn't find it on a free test. However, let me show you what my results were. And that's not it. That's my trainer, who he'd love to be subject of the call. See, right now my cursor just froze, and now it's free. It's very irritating. Anyway, I'm definitely test as a 5, and I figured I must be a 5 wing 4 because this is the truity.com test. It takes about 10 minutes. It's free. Obviously, they want you to buy their full report, which is $29 and all that. So nowhere does it say I'm a 5 wing 4, but I believe not only by looking at this diagram, but then by reading about the 2 different possibilities for the wings of the 5, I'm most definitely a 5 wing 4. I am absolutely not a 5 wing 6. So 5 wing 4. So I ended up figuring out that by taking a whole bunch of free things that I'm a 5 wing 4 social. And Denise or Kathy, if you guys want to share what that social variation means, that'd be interesting for I think people. But it also was one that always wanted to also compare what your Myers-Briggs was. So I end up being an INTPA 5-wing 4 social. Ta-da! And
Interesting.
I was thinking about turning that into a t-shirt. So, which I guess is a very 5 thing to do. Actually, a 5-wing 4 thing to do, because the 4 brings in some creativity. Okay, Denise, I'm babbling. Will you tell us a little bit about the whole social thing?
Well, there's 3 types of variants. One of them is social, one of them is self-preservation, and the other one is sexual. This social means that you see life through the lens of all of the people around you, everybody, they. So your conversations or your thoughts come through that perspective, whereas a self-pres sees life through, it's about me. It's about something that I am thinking about or something that I want to do. And the sexual is really about me and you, me and somebody else. So it's 2 people in the conversation.
But it has nothing to do with sexual it's just like a one-on-one kind of a thing.
Yes, again, language in this particular variant is one-on-one or sexual. So it,
All right, yeah. I'm sure that question comes up all the time when people go like, what are you saying? And then they giggle.
Yeah. So it's really about me and you, or all of us.
All right. Okay.
And social is all of us.
Yeah. So I was reading about my 5 social. It says that as a 5, that I really am very reclusive, and I really do, want to explore things and understand things, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're a 5 self-preservation, you would be hesitant to share any of that information that you were gathering or whatever, or those insights, knowledge, whatever, you really hold on to it. Where if you're a social, or maybe it's because I've got that 4-wing, I feel compelled to share it with everybody. So that made sense. I wouldn't know what the one-on-one part would be, unless maybe there are people that just want to share it very intimately with a relative small group of people, or only in one-on-one situations. Is that the right interpretation, Denise?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah, yep. Anywho, so that one's me. And then I also was looking a little bit about what I should cultivate for growth, which would be 8 in my case, and what patterns I fall into if I'm under stress, which is most definitely 7 for me. So I'm very much an escapist. So yeah, anyway, that's me. So I thought that was interesting. Even though the free test didn't tell me what my wing was, I believe that if you can get like a circumplex diagram like this one, there's some inferences that you can probably make. I will tell you that out of all the personality tests that I've ever done, I remember saying this as well, a decade plus ago when we first looked at Enneagrams, that I thought that while all of these tests are interesting, I thought the Enneagram was particularly intriguing, because I don't know how it gets all that information from the questions I was asked. So, but obviously someone is very carefully structured some tests to at least have some reliable, predictable, accurate kind of things to do. Okay, so we can certainly go back into our exploration of what each of these different types happens to be. That's all fine. But I'm kind of curious to know, how is this actually used? And so let me defer to Denise, Kathy, anyone else on the call who's got a background using the Enneagram. Like any other psychometric experience, it's very eye-opening. It's very, interesting. If I was in a group of people, it's very interesting to know what one another happens to be. And I'd like to get back to that in just a second. But I'm still intrigued about, how is it actually used? So I'll throw that to you guys. You got 2 things you can answer. Either what type did you turn out to be? Very curious. And or how are you actually using this with real clients?
Yeah, I'm a 3. I just finished.
You're a 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So that's a successful achiever. I think a different model might give it a different name. The performer. Okay, excellent. And were you able to determine a wing, or that just your core type?
It looks like 8.
So you'd be you can either be a 3-wing 2 or a 3-wing.
Oh, I see. I'm a 3-wing 2.
A 3-wing 2. Okay.
Yeah.
And so some of those giver qualities comes into play.
Yeah.
Denise, comments about that? I mean, obviously I'm just giving a superficial kind of glimpse into it. Do you have anything you might want to say about a 3 wing 2?
Well, that's a great type to be. That's me. I'm a 3 wing 2.
Ah,
But the interesting thing about the Enneagram is that when you know your type, you know what your tendencies are and you know how you react to things. And here's the thing, we just want to use the Enneagram to start noticing what we're doing and giving ourselves a choice to do something different. So
mhm.
I want to respond differently to the life that I have. So going deeper, it's about a story that I'm telling. Ian Morgan Cron has a wonderful book about the story we tell. And the reason why he says from the story perspective is that when we were a child, we came up with a story in our minds, we'll say 2, 3, 4 years old, of how we could be safe and secure and be loved in life. And so given your situation, your environment and the people around you, you created this story with your own personality intact inside and decided how you would be successful in the world. So
Mhm.
how do we use this is to know our story from the past and rewrite the story for the future, because now that you know where your motivation comes from, you can rewrite the story to be able to respond the way you want to respond going forward in the future.
Excellent. Excellent.
So I'm wondering then, based on what you're saying, Denise, could the Enneagram be used for youth? When I first took it, I was appointed by the governor of Florida as a court-appointed advocate for the court for foster care youth, and I was a foster parent, and I was a 5'4" then, and recently when I took it again, I'm a 5'4", and they come from neglect, abandonment, or abuse, so they definitely have trauma that's embedded in some of these illnesses that they suffer from.
Mhm.
But no one really works with them at that level to help them figure out, the narratives that are guiding that. But we can trace that back to some of the trauma that they have. That's what some of the pediatricians do with them.
Absolutely. In fact, I think some of the people that I've been most excited about supporting and helping are the people that are younger, because they get to know this information now, as opposed to waiting till they're 50 years old, and they can rewrite their story now as
Right.
they know it. And there are books out there for children to learn their Enneagram. My daughter, who's 21 now, she took the Enneagram when she was 15. And honestly, she knew what she was doing at 15 and made some adjustments to, her reactions to things so that she wouldn't come off a way in which she didn't want it to unfold. So I think that you're onto something, that children should absolutely have the option
Mhm.
of seeing who they are and how they show up in the world.
I agree.
Especially those foster care youth, because I sent to T and Linda a link for Dr. Gabor Mate, who's family medicine, and he deals with trauma and addiction. That's his expertise. But he had mentioned on a call with a group of physicians about the Enneagram Prison Project. I didn't even know such a thing exists, but the lady who started it, she's certified in the Enneagram, and her mom committed suicide when she was younger. And so she said when she went to the prison and she's teaching, these prisoners Enneagrams, she discovered that she had all this trauma, and that was a prison in and of itself.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, and talking about how soon someone should learn it, I've always felt that as soon as a kid can wrap their head around 5 levels of tension, they should understand tension management. That could help them deal better with all of the awfulness of growing up, from whatever bullying it is to, I mean, they should really know when their level of tension is being manipulated and how to monitor and manage their own level of tension. So I think you're right. The sooner kids learn this sort of stuff, any of this self-awareness stuff, the better. Kathy, you've just done.
Yeah. I think, listen, I think it's one of the most in-depth developmental programs out there of all the, I really don't bother with most other personality type stuff because I think this has the potential for the greatest depth. And I haven't used it a lot, but I've used it enough with others. For me, it was very, very helpful for me to understand, I think, my patterns. And I think that if you think about using this in combination with the change grid, what the change grid gives you your situational experience, and what this shows you is your behavioral, your pattern of experience with stress, and how you work and manage stress, even in the reporting, the way they talk about it, both Riso Hudson and if you go further in depth with Riso Hudson with the wisdom of the Enneagram, or the other one, the IE piece, the report that I mean, you're looking at long-term patterns, potential patterns, and some observable patterns, and I think that's how I would use them in combination. I don't, it's not adding a lot of insight into how it overlays, but I think it's certainly there. But that's my thought. What's interesting was that I came out a 5 this time I took it, a 5-4.
Welcome to the 5-4s.
Well, and then when I took it again from Riso Hudson, I was a 1 competing with the 5 with a wing, with the second most frequent type as being a 2. So it's interesting to see. Riso Hudson has a different way of asking questions. So I came out as more of a 1 in that one. So that was very interesting. I was kind of shocked to come out a 5, just because I'd always thought of myself as a 1, but I understand now over time how that may have occurred.
Let me throw one little interesting thing in. Linda also tested out as a 1 wing 2. And so that gave us the opportunity to say, okay, how about compatibility as far as relationships go? And apparently it turns out that a 5-4 and a 1-2 are great together.
Okay, well, that makes
sense. Be that you've just recognized 2 very compatible parts within yourself.
Yes. And it also makes sense why I am drawn to this group, because it's the same, it's a similar concept of observation and investigation and all of that. Yeah.
Well, I've always wondered, is a group like this, how about this? If I look at any group that exists out there, is it going to resonate with one type over the rest? I would imagine the answer is yes. So what kind of people are attracted to the sort of things that all of us do? And so I thought, well, there is a lot of observer stuff. There's a lot of romantic stuff about the idealism and that sort of a thing. But then there's a lot of, I think, type 2 energy that comes into the work that we're doing. We got to be a little bit of a skeptic. So Denise, I understand, we're all parts, we all have parts of all of these. But do you think that we can draw a pattern between who shows up for hours?
I don't know about that. And here's why, because we get our types from what motivates us to do what we do. And so I'll just give you an example. Me as a performer, I'm motivated for other people to appreciate what it is that I do, so that I feel like I'm getting love from everybody else. But that doesn't mean the job that I do is not any better or worse than a 5 who's motivated for the details and the more information and being an expert in what they do. It's the delivery kind of can be the same.
Yeah,
do you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, we love you.
I love you back.
Thank you.
So how could this apply for like what Tim does with DEI? Like say he goes to organization, he's implementing DI program, how could you use something like this to help people understand some of the, I guess, proclivities they may have in terms of actually the change and adaptation that might be needed to actually, carry this program out and actually do the work without the resistance and that kind of thing, or at least understanding that there may be some resistance and then you can kind of move on.
Did anybody just hear a change grid suddenly come into play?
Ah, got it.
I mean, because now you're saying like you have an individual, and you guys have always heard me say this. I have no argument at all that personality is real. We each have our own little personality, but we also have an entire change grid available to us. And so if I overlay the change grid on my personality, and I look at activities that are things I want to do. So you're talking about growing in this area, taking care of this issue. I mean, it's starting to feel very situational. So how does a type 3, a performer, experience, let's say, expressive driver energy versus how does a type 1, a perfectionist experience that? It could be a different experiences, I guess is what I'm saying. But we would still have all that available to us. So yeah, that's what I kind of wanted to get to. How does this get used? I think this is an amazing tool of self-awareness. And I love the idea is about rewriting your story. That's all really great. But the moment I hear a word like rewrite, that's an activity. So, and inside of rewriting my story, like I know for me, I'm supposed to cultivate more of the type 8. So I'm a 5. My growth opportunity is with becoming this protector kind of thing, and so I go, well, that's got to give rise to a whole bunch of behavioral possibilities, exercises, changes I might want to be making, specifically a new set of goals or tasks, because for me to make that growth, I'm going to have to do something differently. And so those doings to me become the activities that would populate a change grid. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all developmental. So it's how do you manage stress? How do you manage tension? How do you avoid or move away from those sort of reactionary places you go that the tendency of your type? And so there is a way to examine that, certainly, and say, all right, what is creating stress? When do I fall into apathy and just just live with the type as a status quo and not move out of it, not change, not try to develop, not try to whatever it is that looks like. So yeah, I mean, it's a developmental process, and you're just using this as a basis to say, these are my basic patterns. Now, what can I do differently by situation to manage my world? Yeah.
Right. Very interesting. Very interesting.
So which line is which in terms of, like, I'm a 5/4, so it goes to the 7 and the 8. So which line is which in terms of
yeah, they don't
stress
have the
and
arrowheads
release?
on here, but if you're a 5, your growth opportunity is to cultivate those qualities of an 8. And what you kind of like have to watch
Okay.
out for, I guess, is a tendency to fall into the 7 patterns. That's the case for a 5. So Denise, did I say that right? That 8 is a growth
Is
opportunity?
it 5? Is it 5/7?
5, yeah, between 5 and 7. Yeah, it's an arrow. It's not a wing. The wings have to be on either side of you, but you always have an arrow that points towards where your growth kind of lies, what you should cultivate to grow, and the other one is what you should kind of watch out for. Is that right, Denise?
That is correct. And one more thing is that, in the Enneagram, there's 9 levels of integration. So at the bottom level is when people are most stressed and very ineffective in their lives, which is the most stressful place at the level of 9. But when you get up to the high level of integration, meaning that you're able to shift that quickly, meaning that you see a situation as a 5, but you want to be a little bit more directive and you want to be a little bit more in charge and controlling of the situation. You have the opportunity to choose those kind of activities or those kind of perspective because you're high level integrated into your own being. So you lost your ego as much and you're more into what does this situation call for.
And so if I'm what's the label for these 9 different levels? So a low level 5, am I more likely to spend time in those 7 behaviors?
Probably.
And
yes.
as I go up in my development, I'm more likely to be favoring more of the 8 and recognize that 7's my Achilles heel or whatever.
Actually, these lines are showing you where you can grow and where you can reduce your stress. So where I would grow is if I can easily adopt more 8 personality types of things to do in my 5-ness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yep, exactly.
And like you said earlier, when I notice that I'm doing things that are running away or being obsessed with certain things, can't stop, then basically I might be operating in a low level of integration because I'm looking more like a 7.
Yeah, interesting.
So
Yeah, go right ahead, and then I'll go to turn this into a therapy
all right,
session.
quick question to Denise. So on integrative 9, they use the language in release point and stress point.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Is
Well,
that the same languaging?
Right. Basically, they just use different words, but 7 is where you know you've gone to for stress.
Yeah.
8 is where you're releasing your hold on your 5 and you're opening up opportunities.
And so, for example, for the 1, the 1, and these are all negative, by the way.
There's multiple.
Very, very negative descriptions for all of these. But the 1's level of integration is the 7, which is an opening up. With the enthusiast, and the designer, the romantic, is where supposedly that's more of a place to go for stress. Although that never made sense to me in that way, but I do understand where the level of integration is to that enthusiast or whatever the other labeling.
Epicure, and yeah. And in fact, I think it's even a different label over here. No, Epicure. Yeah, well, I just grabbed these images because there's a lot that show these different variations of what could be going on, and I'll show you a couple if you really want to go like, what the heck is that talking about? But nevertheless, I'll just share with you, and you guys know this, many years ago, I put together a program called The Accountable Self. And The Accountable Self had 2 subtitles. So sometimes we called it Becoming a Finisher in a World of Starters. And the other subtitle was Conquering the 80% Existence. And now that I've done a deeper dive into my Enneagram, I'm feeling that what I put together was a self kind of biographical training program. Because I'm the one who, when I'm under stress, I end up going after finding more distractions and starting more projects that I never get around to finishing. All good stuff, I might point out, but nevertheless, it's not finished. And so that whole thought about becoming a finisher in a world of starters, I think I'm speaking my own weakness, my own problem. And so I built a program around it. So do people do that, Denise? Am I just the weird one? I'm okay with that.
That's very easy for me. And that's why from the outside, people will say, well, wow, you're very disciplined, but I have to do that because I can go off the rails quite easily with, I call it shiny object syndrome. Everything looks great.
Absolutely. I've gone down more fascinating rabbit holes. And I don't regret going down them. To me, it was an amazing opportunity to just learn what there is to learn. See, I'm sounding like a 5. Wow.
Well, you know, I
earlier-
can relate to that in a non-competitive environment because I think I was more of a my one came out more in a corporate setting, but
Mhm.
left to my own devices, which is more recently where I am, I can go down any possible rabbit hole forever and
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
just go down, keep going down rabbit holes, and I'm very happy doing that as long as nobody's
Mhm.
holding me accountable. But it's very interesting to see that I think we do follow our own paths. I mean, Denise, I'd be curious to hear what Denise says. I can't imagine that we don't follow our own patterns as we, you know, create our own stuff.
Yeah.
We do. And that's the thing. It's okay because some of this stuff is good strength. It's your talents, it's your skills, you know what I mean? So we want you to continue to do some of the things that you've always done, but in more of a conscious way, in more of a way in which you're choosing to do the projects or the quality and the perfectionism that you bring to the world. That's awesome, but just as long as it doesn't take over and just become a way of being as opposed to a choice.
Mhm. So Denise, I have a structural question for you. I noticed as I look about these different arrows and how they travel that 3, 6, and 9 form a very strict, rigid, inescapable triangle.
Yes.
Where the others kind of form a very distorted like hexagon, because you go from 1 to 7, 5 up to 8, down 2, 3, 4. So you actually could jump around through 6, but these people 3, 6, 9 seem to stay in that world of 3, 6, 9. What's that all about?
Well, the 3, 6, and 9 are in the center of each of the 3 centers of intelligence. So a 2, 3, 4 is the 3 is the center of the intelligence of the heart. So
Mhm.
it's about compassion. It's about feelings. Whereas the 8, 9, and 1, the 9 is the center of the gut instinct, the intelligence that comes from our knowingness or our instinct. And it's about action. 8, 9, and 1 are about action. So 9 is in the center of those 3 personality types.
Okay.
With 5, 6, and 7, 6 is in the center of the thinking center of intelligence.
Mhm. Interesting. All right. So this is thinking, this is acting, and what was 2, 3, 4?
Feeling.
Feeling. Okay. All right. That's interesting. All right. It is a very intriguing diagram. I'm just going to tell you. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. Because if I could figure out how this actually overlays on the change grid, I think I would say, well, I'm done. I have merged enough.
A true 5, a true 5.
Yeah, well, no, the true 5 would say that 5 minutes later, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole and all of a sudden investigating something else.
A true 5 says, I won't stop until I continue to investigate for the rest of my life.
Yeah, well, it's true, and now that I'm, 65 and I'm saying, well, what happens down the road? My thought has been, I want my work to have a life of its own long after I'm gone. So that alone is a new set of things that have to be explored. How do you do that so something can contribute? I mean, I think maybe it's my 5 talking, but I think that it would be a real loss to the world if the change grid fizzled out and vanished from, the body of knowledge that humanity has. So, anyway. All right. So going back though, to me, what's ultimately most important is how practical do we make this? And because, this is pretty much about the change grid, I want to really look at the practical way that someone who is using the Enneagram can incorporate the change grid for not only their client's benefit, but for their benefit as well. And so if I was a pure Enneagram coach, I don't know that such a thing even exists, but does the Enneagram coach sooner or later move on from talking about the person and all these little factoids we've been sharing? When do they get down to the practical work of change? Because I gotta believe no one comes to someone that says, I want to talk to you because I want to know about my Enneagram. I kind of wonder if more often than not, they're coming to you saying, like, I've got this issue, I've got this goal, I've got this whatever, and I want to explore a little bit more. I mean, what do these people say to you, Denise, that comes to you about that, or Kathy, or anybody who's using this? How do they come to this, and where do they go with this?
Trust me, nobody comes to me and says, I want to transform my life and please help me write my new story. Nobody comes to that.
Right.
They all come with a problem, with something that's going on. And I help them find out, where does it originate? Where does this behavior or this thinking or this feeling originate? Because
And that's your first move, because I really am curious to know the step by step. Oh my God, I'm a 5. So,
well, the first
help me.
the first thing that we want to know from somebody is, in what context are you coming to me for? What's your goal here? What is it that you want to do?
Yeah.
And how do you want to change? What about your life needs to change so that you're happier, or that you find more joy, or that you find more peace, or whatever those things are? And we work backwards with, and I think there is this overlay where once you realize where you're motivated and where you're coming from, then you can apply the change grid and say, well, here's the particular actions. Where would you typically go with this? And maybe you could find out what's challenging and what's, capable, where they're capable of doing things, and help them see how they apply the action to what they're knowing about themselves.
Okay, so I guess my question is, did you do that because that's your 4 wing? But you said you have a 2 wing. I guess what I'm wondering about is, how much of this is dictated by the Enneagram of the professional as they go about working with the client?
Well, I would argue, for me, people have come to me and say, I want transformation. I mean, that's much more the realm that I work. I want transformation in my life. I want to move to a different place. I want to develop. I want to transform spiritually, mentally, whatever, career-wise. And so for me, it really is about, okay, let's take a look, and where do you want to be, and how do you want to develop? So for me, the change grid is a major developmental tool versus other types of development planning processes that we've all used going forward. So so maybe as a 1, I will think, how can I reform? What's the transformation? What needs to happen here on a higher sort of plane? And I'm not saying that in any weird way, impractical way, but just, so I don't know, but I think anybody, any type, can use this for transformation.
Yeah, right, I would agree, but it's interesting to me that you've just kind of demonstrated that as a 1, you come to your work as a 1. And so you're going to, look at the situation, work with people with kind of, you can't set aside your oneness, right? This is
right.
who you are. Where I'm a 5, I'm going to come at it from the 5. So I think all 9 types could probably build very successful human development businesses, but I can say that the business that a 2 would build is going to be very different than a 6 would build. So
I agree, because the woman who trained me and who coached me and took me through the Enneagram was a 2, a nurturer. And she took a very different approach than I have taken since. It's more like, it's not sort of this ongoing, this is who you are, let me help you understand it, da 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 da. Whereas for me, it's like, okay, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, the practical part. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because now that would mean the 8, 9, and 1. These, you said, were the action ones.
Yes.
these feel like the kind of human development professionals that are going to say, give me the situation, let's find the remedy, now let's do it.
Exactly.
And then maybe these are all about feeling it, exploring it, feeling it, and these are about understanding it.
And for the human development process, though, it would be so cool if everybody actually did know their Enneagram type so they could get out of their own way.
Right. Or maybe even walk themselves and their client around the whole circle to look at a situation from all these vantage points.
Right.
That sounds very billable. Well, I mean, no, ultimately, there's a practical application of this. This is a business. And so how can I use the Enneagram? How can I use the change grid to not only help the client, but to help myself and my business as well?
That's it. I like this because as a 5, again, in medical school, we're taught motivational interviewing, and it's supposed to get us to be able to circumvent simply the physical aspects of the diagnosis. I call it beyond the diagnosis. There's a way to greet the humanity of the people whom you're serving. And I took a health design thinking course at Thomas Jefferson School of Medicine. And interestingly, design thinkers, they start with narrative. That's the central point that they utilize to actually design things, is they want to understand the context of how people actually interact with whatever it is that they're designing. So I thought about this because there is such a thing called narrative medicine. Again, these stories and belief systems that people have is embedded in the body. And so it begins to impact them. So this is natural for me to want to investigate, like, what's behind this? You come with a pain in a certain area, but that's not necessarily the point of origin of that pain. That's just where you're experiencing it. So I want to know a little bit more about what's going on, what's your environment like, all those different kinds of things. So this is quite powerful to me.
I think it would be really useful for you, Brian, to understand what kind of stress each type puts itself under. I'm certainly very familiar with my own, but what type of stress each type puts itself under, and that will give rise to the kinds of diseases that someone might attract.
Absolutely.
Or maladies or whatever. Yeah.
Or why they're staying where they are.
Yeah, that's the big one there. Because I'm thinking of Alan Deutschman's book, Change or Die is literally the title. And it was, he surveyed a John Hopkins study of people who had a triple bypass. And I think it was something like astoundingly 70% still would not change their behavior, although he called it the 3 Fs. They had the fear, the force, and the facts of the situation. They still did not change their behavior. The ones who did, they were emotionally connected to something, such as the one guy said he just wanted to live long enough to see his grandson graduate from high school. So they changed the narrative. That reframing helped.
Absolutely.
I like, you just said fear, force, or facts. The fear comes from the feeling center. The facts come from the thinking center. And the force comes from the action center.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Again, I'll just say that I believe that brilliance, wisdom has arisen in many different people in many different situations all along. Sooner or later, there is going to be a way that all of these things that make sense standing by themselves can be merged together to give us a more complete and robust understanding of this critter we call a human. So that doesn't surprise me at all that these 3 Fs would resonate with what's going on with the Enneagrams. So I think that's very, very interesting. Denise, does the exact center exist on the Enneagram? And is that something that people, that there's the belief that people can work towards achieving that, or is it a hopeless pursuit? So what?
No, absolutely. That's where we all strive for. And I think there's only been one person on the planet that ever got there, which was probably Jesus. But you know, I'm saying, like,
Okay. Oh, yeah.
there's no way to ultimately get there for a long time. So the thing about integration is that you can be moving up and down the levels of integration all day long, all week long, all month long, you know, so it's always changing.
Interesting. So I don't know if the test that everyone's taking ends up giving you these crazy pie diagrams, but my thought is that if you could achieve perfect balance or darn close to perfect balance, this also feels like it's going to move closer and closer to the exact center of the change grid. So that goal of being at 6-6, where you can be detached or whatever, you can be everything and nothing at the exact same moment. Is that something that would resonate with the philosophy behind the Enneagram?
So what would happen in the center is that you actually are not identified with any type.
Right.
So
How does that manifest itself, though, behaviorally and
yes,
psychospiritually?
feeling and thinking, absolutely. So it's a combination of, when you're in the center, you're zen-like, you know what I mean? So you're not.
So that way and is there the belief that people can move towards that in a successful kind of way, or is that beyond the scope of, I mean, maybe if you're a very evolved whatever.
Right.
But
I mean, that's what we're helping people to find their direction.
all right. So then, and again, I'm just trying to figure out how the change grid overlays in this. So if we're basically saying the first thing we want is for someone to understand, and then once they understand what they're all about and, you know, play with that for a little while, we want them to understand that there is benefit in cultivating each of these other understandings that might not be such a big slice of pie. And as they become more comfortable, more able to move from one into the other, that obviously makes them far more resilient, far more adaptable. All those good sorts of things have to come with it, but that feels a bit down the road when it comes to developmental work that we do with clients. Maybe now, Kathy, you were saying that a lot of your clients are already coming rather self-aware. Maybe your ideal client is already more on their journey.
Well, I mean, I listen, it's not that highfalutin. I mean, it's you know, it's these are high achievers who are looking for more transformation, and they could be looking for higher, you know, a real world accomplishment, or spiritual development. So, you know, and greater fulfillment. And also along the way, learning how to release whatever pain patterns they put themselves in. So, you know, you're dealing with all of it when you're there. So I don't, you know, I don't necessarily, I haven't done anywhere near as much with the Enneagram as Denise has, so I couldn't speak to it that way, but I would always want to work with somebody with the Enneagram as moving, where is your level of integration? You know, where are you operating at your least ego-based, highest form of development, and take it from there. And then the step of moving into the center is a whole other step. You know, that's a whole other add-on move where you need to learn how to find your center.
Right.
So it's much higher. I mean, I think actually that the change grid comes more directly and comes closer to bringing you there in terms of visualizing it than anything else, which is one of my you know, one of my reasons, one of the things I like about the change grid, among many other things. But so you can, I would use both the same way Denise talked about it. I mean, you're talking about the change grid is situational.
Yep.
And the change grid and the Enneagram is more about patterns. And so how do you work your patterns using the change grid? How can you shift patterns using the change grid?
Yeah.
in different situations. And
You
you can
know,
only change in different situations. You know, you can't just sort of decide, I'm just going to change. I'm going to change generically. It's all done situationally.
That's right.
You know?
And so it's interesting that as you've shared that, my head went, well, then maybe what the Enneagram's overlap is with the change grid is not so much as additional descriptive insights, but really more structured change grid maneuvers.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think
It's a skill set.
really do. Yeah, it's a skill set. I really, and a pattern about patterns and about using the change
So,
grid for
so
patterns.
then would I, because I guess I'll just throw this out. Maybe it's just because of habit, but I tend to always start a discussion with a client, even if it's an established client, a new discussion with the client, following the path of self-discovery. And then from the path of self-discovery, I populate an activity list and I see where they're at. Well, then we have to get into, well, okay, are you okay with where you are? Where would you rather be? How are we going to move you there? And the moment that discussion comes up, now my head is going like, I need to know, they need to know their Enneagrams. They need to know, because it may very well be that their perfect maneuver is to cultivate the qualities of some type that's along one of their arrows. So I can certainly see how I might actually want to start off with the change grid as a needs assessment, and then use the Enneagram as a tool for change. But I can also see how I could start with an Enneagram and say, all right, well, this is who you are. Now tell me what's going on. And as they start talking about whatever the situations are, now I populate an activity list and say, here's how you're likely to be approaching that, or what you might want to do inside of the knowledge of what your Enneagram happens to be. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I like that idea. It reminds me of Dr. Susan David. She's a fellow South African, that a Harvard professor. She wrote a book called Emotional Agility, and she talks about how we tend to fuse ourselves with whatever circumstance we're going through. And what she advocates for is to create separation so that you can deal with it. And she talks about it in 4 steps. And that first step is just what you described. It's about showing up, where you're facing, thoughts and emotions with a sense of curiosity, but more importantly, acceptance. And so you would need, Enneagram information to understand this is what I'm dealing with, front and center, because then the next step is about stepping out, where you kind of detach from the emotion of it. And then she says, walking your why. So you use those core values of what you understand about yourself to drive that why. And then the last step is about moving on. So now you're talking about the next steps of rewriting that story. And she calls that, she has like an emotional agility quiz and that kind of thing too. So again, you have to come to that, to show up takes courage, and you can do that with support and the right information. But if you're acting out, without that curiosity, then it's going to be a resistance, and you can't resist and learn at the same time. One cancels out the other.
See, and that's, I see the Enneagram as fitting into that path of self-discovery. It's following the thread of the path of self-discovery. So what's your current state? Well, situationally, what is your current state? Well, what is your history as well? And then what are you looking for? And then what are your obstacles? Where have you been? I mean, that whole process fits very neatly into an Enneagram investigation, and going back and forth with the change grid. So does that make sense, T? With what I just?
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's what I mean. I like hearing that there's multiple ways that we could integrate the 2 models to the mutual benefit of one another, of those models. So I like that idea. Yeah.
Also languaging, I think, would be key with each type, right? How we're communicating the maneuvers of the change grid would impact differently based on their Enneagram type, because how you communicate with a 6 would be different from a 3. even though the maneuvers would be the same, but the communication would be different.
Yeah, in fact, on some
The
of the reports
languaging
that
would
I've
be
seen,
different.
there's a lot of information given about how to best work with somebody, given
Right.
whatever their type happens to be. So I think that's all good. We're at the top of the hour, so I think I'd certainly like to continue this discussion on our next call. I did have something I wanted to share with you guys about the overlay. I'll send myself a note, but I found it easier to start the overlay process when Denise said 3 of these are about facts or information, 3 are about feelings, and 3 are about action, thoughts, feelings, and action. And I can get that overlay without too much trouble.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. Yeah.
Right, because obviously the action ones are going to need to be what direction, generally speaking.
Outgrid.
Outgrid, maybe a little
Outgrid.
upgrade depending on what's pulling it. I know
Just
for certain
emotions.
all the
Yeah.
thought ones are more likely to be where ability is high. So
Downgrade.
that's going to be more downgrade. And I know for certain feelings are the domain of the amiables and the expressives. So I'm thinking those are going to rotate around there. So I think that based on Denise sharing that today, that we need to go back and look at the overlay and say, does that help us find how all this fits together? But I love that today we said, look, from a practical perspective, we can make it work very easily with one another and to the mutual benefit of everyone involved. Very
I
interesting.
like that. I like that.
Yeah, and then I just had one last question for Denise, a curiosity. As I've already said, this is my Enneagram. I'm a 5. Well, earlier today, Lynn and I met with our personal trainer, and I said, Mike, fill this out. And so he filled it out, and I said, Mike, I'm going to share this with the circle. And he ends up being an 8 wing 7. And apparently that's a pretty rare Enneagram type. I mean, Denise, you would know more than me about frequency with these sorts of things, but apparently that's quite the thing. But what I was wondering about is why are so many of his wedges so big? Versus I look at mine and I've got a couple of big ones, but all these tiny ones. So what's that all about?
He answered yes to those questions that identified.
So this is a reflection of the amount of the number of times he said he gave the extreme response.
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. Yeah, he did. He chose he worked very hard to reduce a 5-point scale to a 3-point scale. And I didn't want to interrupt that as he was doing it because I wanted to do his whatever was natural for him. But I thought this man does not use a lot of in-betweens. So.
And what I find interesting about these 2 Enneagram charts that you've just showed me is that both you and your trainer have the same scores that are the highest scores in each one of the centers. So you both have 8, 5, and 3 as your highest scores in those centers.
Yeah.
And that means that your tri-type is the same. So you guys have a lot in common.
Yeah, we do. We do.
And the tri-type is called the solution master. So just take that.
Solution master. Ooh. All right. Now, don't you all want to talk to Denise and say, okay, tell me more about me?
Yeah, because mine has a whole lot of those up as well.
Yeah, the big slices instead of smaller slices.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure not all of the tests give you a pie chart as the feedback. I saw one that just gives you a chart, of just the data. And I thought, well, that's a yawn fest, but that's what they gave. Yeah. All right. Anyway, okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining in. We'll pick up where we left off. Have a lovely weekend. So bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Great discussion.
Yeah, it was great, interesting.